to the World War II newspaper channel where we read the Chicago Tribune one day at a time, going through World War II as it happened through the eyes of those who lived it. If you enjoy content like this, please subscribe to this channel and click on the bell icon to get notifications when a new upload is going to premiere. And also, if you want to hear the actual newsmakers, go check out my other channel, the companion channel to this one, the World War II Old Time Radio channel. There we have vintage broadcasts, including newscasts, speeches, old movies, and music. And subscribe to that channel and click on the bell icon. Now for the newspaper. News as read from the Chicago Tribune for Monday, January 20th, 1941. Henry Chop reporting. The weather today. The sun rose at 7:13 a.m. It set at 4:50 p.m. For Chicago and vicinity, partly cloudy and warmer on Monday. Tuesday, partly cloudy to cloudy with light rain or snow in the afternoon or at night. Gentle variable winds, mostly southeast on Monday. The low temperature, 3 degrees. The high temperature, 17. The headline, begin first third term today. Washington, D.C., January 19th. Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt, who has had 8 years' experience in hurrying through crowds and smiling no to autograph seekers, today shepherded Mrs. Henry A. Wallace through a stiff pace of Inauguration Eve receptions and teas. The wife of the vice president-elect got her first lesson in how to take in 3 receptions, scheduled in the same hour, shake hands with thousands of persons, change clothes in split-second timing, dash to a formal dinner, and then wind up at a concert. As a warm-up for this schedule, Mrs. Roosevelt was hostess at a buffet luncheon at the White House for 150 guests, campaign workers who helped make this inauguration a third term for Mr. Roosevelt. First on the list after Mrs. Wallace joined her was a reception given by inaugural Chairman Joseph E. Davies and Mrs. Davies, a lavish affair of many orchids, camellias, mink coats, champagne, and top-notch names in society and politics. Mrs. Roosevelt in black velvet and Mrs. Wallace in brown crepe trimmed with bronze beads stood in the receiving line along with Franklin D. Roosevelt Jr. The Davies, Mr. Davies or Mrs. Davies was in black velvet and lace, and former Governor Max Gardner of North Carolina and Mrs. Gardner, whose frock was Irish blue velvet. Most of the 33 governors in town and their wives were there, as were Supreme Court justices and their wives, and cabinet members and their wives. Raymond Massey, actor, and Mrs. Massey came by, as did Mickey Rooney. Anna, the Roosevelt's daughter, and her husband, John Bodeger, a Seattle, Washington publisher, arrived with Mrs. Roosevelt. The Roosevelt clan of 5 children and 4 of their grandchildren and Mrs. Sarah Roosevelt, the president's 87-year-old mother, are White House guests. From the Davies reception, Mrs. Roosevelt and Mrs. Wallace were whisked in a White House car to the Women's National Democratic Club, where a crowd of several hundred women, mostly from out of town and attending a conference of affiliated Democratic clubs, were waiting. New York, January 19th. A free license granted by the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, or ASCAP, will enable the 3 major networks to broadcast all music to be played during President Roosevelt's inaugural ceremonies tomorrow. Spokesman for the National Broadcasting Company and the Columbia and Mutual Broadcasting Systems said today that since ASCAP had lifted the restriction on its songs for the inaugural ceremonies, the entire music program would be heard over their stations, regardless of whether the tunes were ASCAP-controlled. ASCAP music has been eliminated from the 3 networks because of a dispute over rates. And now for world news. Berlin, January 19th. A smashing new blow against the already crippled British aircraft carrier Illustrious at Valletta, Malta today, and an aerial thrust through British positions in the region of the Suez Canal on Friday night were announced in Berlin today. It was the third attack against the Illustrious in 9 days, but the first by the Nazis against the Suez area in this war. The Germans regard the Suez Canal as one of the three main strategic strongholds of the British Empire. Gibraltar II is gradually being brought into the sphere of action, the Germans say. Singapore III is out of range for the present. The attack on the Suez area was mentioned only briefly in the communique, which said individual German battle planes on Friday night attacked militarily important objectives in the region of the Suez Canal in Egypt. More details were available, however, on today's dive bomber attack on the Illustrious and the harbor at Valletta. The mid-Mediterranean island was enveloped in smoke clouds after the attack, the Germans declared. The Illustrious, previously hit on January 10th and January 16th and believed a helpless wreck by the Germans, was struck with 3 more bombs, it was said. In addition, the Germans asserted their planes had scored a hit on a destroyer and others on small vessels lying in the vicinity of the Illustrious. The arsenal docks and factories near the harbor also were reported blasted. Loss of 3 planes was acknowledged by the Nazis, who said 3 British Hurricane fighters also had fallen in the aerial battles that developed. Dispatches from Valletta itself said at least 15 German planes had been shot down. The Germans attacked in large numbers, the message said, and caused extensive damage to civilian property. Today's attack on Malta followed one of yesterday, in which the Germans concentrated on the island's 2 airfields, Halfar and Lucca. Hangars and barracks were pounded to pieces or set afire, while the airfields were converted into crater landscape, it was said. In this attack, the plane losses were said at 2 German and 1 British. In Saturday's raid, the British at Malta said 10 Nazi planes were downed and not 6, as previously announced. Athens, January 19th. An Italian attempt to recapture important heights held by the Greeks north of the Albanian city of Klissura was beaten off with Italian losses of men and material, it was reported here today. Greek sources said their soldiers waited in snowbound positions until the Italians' counterattackers approached very near. Then the Greeks opened up with heavy fire, driving the fascists back. The weather along the whole front continued severe, with a snowstorm blowing over most of the fighting ground. The Greeks said these bad conditions restricted activities to local operations and artillery duels. Summarizing the day's operations, a government spokesman said, despite adverse weather conditions, a new advance of local character was affected by our troops. An important reconnaissance patrol was completed and some prisoners were taken. According to information we have obtained, some new battalions of black shirts have arrived in Albania but have stayed in the rear, not following the division of Tuscany Wolves, whose 77th Regiment was exterminated. The Italians say nothing of this in their communiques. The spokesman denied Rome reports that Salonika had sustained heavy bomb damage and that British motorized forces had arrived in Salonika. Cairo, Egypt, January 19th. British motorized units pursuing fleeing Italian soldiers along the 200-mile Sudanese front were believed tonight to have crossed the border into Italian East Africa after forcing the fascists from Kassala, the last Anglo-Egyptian Sudan city held by Premier Mussolini's men. Their position precarious after weeks of constant patrol action by the British, the Italians withdrew 3 days ago from Kassala, only 15 miles from Eritrea. It was only today, however, that the British announced reoccupation of the town the Italians had captured last July. The Italians were said to have left Kassala, a city of about 20,000 population and capital of a valuable copper-growing section, almost without firing a shot. Ethiopian irregulars operating behind the fascists were believed partly responsible for this withdrawal. With the British constantly reinforcing positions around the town and the Ethiopian irregulars lurking along their communications in the rear, the Italians were said to have found it difficult to hold the post. Abandonment of Kassala was believed to mean the Italians had dropped any idea of attacking the Sudan from this region, and specifically the British said it removed a threat to the center dam controlling waters of the Blue Nile. The British were said to be striking heavily at Eritrea, with light tanks and armored cars leading the eastward movement. The Italians were believed to be trying to fall back to three main frontier posts built 20 miles east of Kassala. The British communique, after reporting Kassala's recapture, added, "The Italian troops along this front are retreating, pursued and harassed by our mobile detachments. Active patrolling continues in the Medema region south of Galabat. Galabat is south of Kassala and near the Ethiopian frontier." The British communique reported these other war developments in the African War. Number one, heavy air bombardment. Heavy air raid on Tobruk, Italian base in Libya, which the British have surrounded, with a large fire started near gasoline dumps in the besieged port. Number two, air raids on targets in Italian East Africa and Italian-held British Somaliland. Rome, January 19th. The Italian High Command today said there was considerable artillery action in the Tobruk sector of Libya. In East Africa, it said fascist airmen bombed British air bases in the Upper Sudan and a railway station and troops in the Lower Sudan. Struga, Yugoslavia, January 19th. Reports reaching this border town today said the Greeks and Italians have been fighting hard for the past 24 hours in the coastal sector near Ducati, north of Chimera. The Greeks pushed forward, the report said, but the Italians counterattacked and drove them back to their positions with heavy losses on both sides. Greek airmen were said to have bombed the port of Valona, but there were no reports of the damage. Greek sources said Italian transport planes were dropping sacks of food near Greek troops, mistaking them for Italians. Rome, January 19th. Heavy snows in Albania have greatly limited the activity of both the fascist and Greek troops, the Italian High Command said today. Jerusalem, Palestine, January 18th, delayed. Several planes of unidentified nationality made the first night air raid of the war on the British Mandate of Palestine early Saturday. Several bombs were dropped in southern Palestine, but no damage or casualties were reported. A brilliant moon above low-hanging clouds aided the high-flying planes. Warnings sounded over the country at 1 a.m. and the all-clear 30 minutes later. Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, January 19th. A high Brazilian source said today that if Brazil takes any action in the halting and apparent seizure of the 8,199-ton French freighter Mendoza by a British warship yesterday, the action will follow the lines of earlier violations of the American neutrality zone. The Mendoza, the Navy Ministry declared yesterday, was stopped by the British auxiliary cruiser Asturias about 5 miles off the southern coast as she was moving out of the dangerous shoal waters at that point, and then proceeded to sea with the Asturias. The newspaper O Globo said the British put a prize crew on board. In earlier violations of the neutrality zone, particularly in the case of the British-trailed German freighter Wakama, which was scuttled by its crew last February, the Brazilian government notified the other American nations and a protest was forwarded to Britain. Officials here said there was no question of violation of Brazil's territorial waters since the Mendoza was halted 2 miles outside the 3-mile limit. However, the incident took place about 300 miles inside the American neutrality belt. The British have not recognized the latter limit. Brazilian officials said that as a violation of the neutrality zone, the incident concerned all the American nations, including the United States, which established it. The Mendoza had been moving along the Uruguayan and Brazilian coast for nearly a week, dodging the Asturias, which followed her, keeping just outside territorial waters. She carried a cargo of food for France, but had no navigation certificate to let her through the British blockade. Berlin, January 19th. In its communique today, the High Command said a German U-boat had sunk two steamers totaling 8,600 gross tons, while on Friday night the Air Force started a number of fires in the southern part of Swansea, Wales, in attacks on military objectives. Two airports in southeast England were attacked by a battle plane on Saturday, the communique says, scoring some bomb hits among a considerable number of planes on the ground. DNB, the official German news agency, declared German long-range guns had shelled a convoy off Dover. Berlin, January 19th. The official German news agency DNB said in a dispatch from Helsingfors today that about 90 vessels totaling 60,000 tons had been lost by the Finnish commercial fleet in 1940, most of them having been sunk by war action. Bern, Switzerland, January 19th. Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini conferred today, it was reported here in authoritative diplomatic circles, but where they met or what they accomplished was not revealed. Speculation, however, was that German aggressive action in a new direction independently or to bolster Italy is imminent. In the past, meetings between the two Axis leaders often have portended developments of importance. Italy invaded Greece on October 28th, the day of their last meeting at Florence. Telephone communications between Berlin and Rome were cut last night, a Berlin dispatch stated. It added that German officials did not deny that reports that Adolf Hitler and Mussolini had conferred yesterday. According to a Rome radio broadcast heard in New York by NBC, a meeting of the Directorate of all fascist parties has been called for tomorrow. Neither Rome nor Berlin officially conferred the meeting place of Hitler and Mussolini, but diplomatic sources said it will be disclosed eventually in a communique. It had been presumed that they would meet in Germany, perhaps at Salzburg or Munich. Observers agreed generally that Mussolini was eager to learn whether Hitler could promise military support for Italy and Albania and North Africa, and if so, how much. In the background of the Hitler-Mussolini conference was an announcement that France's chief of state, Marshal Pétain, and Pierre Laval, Austrian vice premier, had come to terms. This was believed to pave the way for resumption of Franco-German negotiations on collaboration. A French cabinet shift was also forecast. Axis sources floated a story that they had put the finishing touches on a new surprise attack, perhaps against Gibraltar, perhaps in the Balkans, perhaps against Britain herself. British sources launched a report that Hitler had found Mussolini weakening in his confidence of an ultimate Axis victory, and that they had reviewed dozens of plans without being satisfied with any. Considerable credence was given in neutral diplomatic sources to Balkan reports that the stage is set for increased air aid to Italy against Greece and against the British in the Mediterranean from Romanian, Italian, and Libyan bases. The meeting, these sources said, may have been merely to put the chiefs' approval on Nazi-fascist collaboration. In Belgrade, Yugoslavia, a report in diplomatic quarters said the British have completed plans for air attacks on Romanian oil fields and rail lines, but are letting them lie rather than give Germany an excuse to send her air squadrons and perhaps even troops into Greece. If Germany moved first, however, by taking a hand in the war in Albania, it was widely believed in Belgrade that a Royal Air Force attack on Romania would be the first British retaliation. Rail lines over which nearly 200,000 Nazi troops have been moved into Romania, Danube River shipping, and the oil fields feeding the Nazi war machine could be dislocated for months by a successful air attack, it is said. Iron Guard speakers at 50 public rallies in Romania warned the Axis enemies in identical language today that it would be useless and dangerous for anyone to try to sabotage our action. In Sofia, Bulgaria, political informants said both England and Germany are seeking from Bulgaria an outright declaration of her position if the war should spread to her area. These sources said the decision may not have to be made soon. Rome, January 19th. That a tremendous Nazi offensive might be expected in about 2 months was indicated today by Mario Appius, authoritative fascist editor. Writing in Premier Mussolini's paper Popolo di Italia at Milan, Appius said Germany has piled up vast supplies this winter. He did not specify on which front the offensive might start. London, January 19th. The British Embassy at Madrid and the Spanish Ministry of Industry and Commerce have signed an agreement for shipment to Spain of quantities of Canadian wheat now stored by Britain in the United States. It was made known tonight. Under this agreement, said to have been reached yesterday, the first shipment of 15,000 tons will leave Baltimore, Maryland shortly in Spanish ships. The contract is regarded as a sign of improved British relations with Spain, often regarded as tied to the Rome-Berlin axis, but suffering from a wheat shortage. It is also seen as an indication of smooth progress in British-Spanish talks on the status of Tangier, the Moroccan international zone, which Spanish forces have occupied. Washington, D.C., January 19th. Wendell Willkie will take a personal message from President Roosevelt to Prime Minister Winston Churchill of England. The president interrupted work on his inauguration address today to pen the message in his own hand and gave it to Willkie during a brief conference they held at the White House. The two men who battled for the presidency in last fall's political campaign talked to Mr. Roosevelt's Oval Study for about 30 minutes. Secretary of State Cordell Hull was with them. We talked about the European situation, Willkie told reporters as he left, and the president gave me a very pleasant personal note to Mr. Churchill. It is more than just a formal introduction. The note, it was learned, introduces Willkie with the comment that he has been trying to keep politics out of the American defense situation and expresses wishes for British success. Its salutation is, Dear Churchill. The envelope containing the note was addressed to a certain naval person, kindness of W. Willkie. Churchill formerly was the First Lord of the Admiralty and shares Mr. Roosevelt's interest in ships. Willkie said he outlined to the president his plans for the forthcoming 2 weeks tour of England, advising the chief executive that he wanted to talk with all the officials who could see him and that he particularly wished to confer with Ernest Bevin, Minister of Labor, and Anthony Eden, Foreign Minister. Willkie will leave by Clipper on Wednesday. Stephen Early, presidential secretary, gave this description of the meeting between the president and the 1940 Republican presidential nominee. Willkie entered and said, "I won't be long. I know what it is to be interrupted while laboring on a speech." Mr. Roosevelt extended his hand and said he was glad to see Willkie. The president called his visitor by his first name, laughingly saying that he wished Wendell were going to be out on the cold inaugural stand tomorrow, taking the oath instead of himself. Willkie, who flew here from New York, told reporters prior to his meeting with Hull that he favored the administration's Lend-Lease bill for aid to Great Britain with 3 serious modifications. These, he said, would be, number 1, return to the people after a designated date of the power which the bill would confer on the president. Number 2, congressional retention of purse strings. Number 3, congressional study of the bill section by section to see whether any powers conferred on the president are unnecessary. London, January 19th. Practically every phase of the government's war effort will be discussed when Parliament next meets. Already the questions which ministers will be asked to answer indicate dissatisfaction with the manner in which vast executive powers have been or have not been used. The sessions also may demonstrate the contrast of American congressional machinery with that of the British Parliament, in which the latter, despite granting the government sweeping powers, is able to control and supervise their use or prevent their abuse by executives who are constantly responsible to the legislature for their actions. Debate on the use of manpower is expected to last 2 days. Ernest Bevin, Minister of Labor, probably will be criticized again for failing to invoke, to the fullest extent, complete dictatorial powers over labor to speed up production. Bevin has been hesitant in using the heavy club in his hand on the ground that, for the most part, the voluntary system is best. Herbert Morrison, Minister of Home Security, although now announcing the greatest conscription order in history, that of compelling every man between 16 and 60 in the country to do rooftop watching 48 hours weekly and serve as firebomb fighters, has been criticized for not doing this before the fire blitz on London on December 29th. The food ministry probably will be under fire for the meat muddle and other food inequalities because of speculation, profiteering, hoarding, and failure to ration such products as eggs and cheese, of which there is scarcity. Another subject will be the extent to which communists in England are promoting defeatism and disaffection in war factories and labor trouble among dock workers. Lord Beaverbrook's Sunday Express complained that despite Britain's unprecedented need for shipping, dock workers at Glasgow have been needlessly delaying ships because of refusal to do piecework, insisting on being paid full daily wages and hired accordingly. The insistence of Glasgow bus drivers that they go to shelters during raids is attributed to communist activity. Anti-war agitation among the nation's munitions workers also is a problem. The Tribune understands the government takes a grave view of communist activity and is considering adopting suppression measures against those elements in the party agitating against war. Minister of Pensions, Sir Walter Womersley, will be asked why his department is penalizing sailors who have escaped from Nazi hands. Sailors who were rescued in a daring destroyer exploit from the German steamer Altmark in a Norwegian port have been informed by the government that their payments of old age pensions and health insurance premiums were in arrears all the time they were German prisoners, and unless they make up the difference in a lump sum, their awards will be deducted accordingly. Recently, there has been a renewal of public demand that the government clarify its peace and war aims, but the Tribune learns that the committee set up to formulate these has not completed a satisfactory draft which could add anything to what already has been said. The weekly cavalcade, demanding that the government immediately tackle this problem, says democracy's answer to Hitler's spacious new economy order cannot merely be democracy. That overworked word needs redefining in the widest terms of social regeneration. London, January 19th. King George VI approved today appointment of Vice Admiral Sir George Lyon as Commander-in-Chief of the Naval District, which covers Vichy, France, January 19th. Marshal Henri Pétain, French Chief of State, and Pierre Laval, ousted on December 13th as Vice Premier and Foreign Minister, have come to terms. It was announced tonight. The announcement said Pétain and Laval conferred yesterday afternoon and that misunderstandings that led to Laval's dismissal were ironed out. A shift in the governmental lineup now is expected. Another dispatch stated that the Pétain-Laval agreement opened the way for Laval's return to the cabinet. A Bern, Switzerland dispatch said Vichy reports spoke of a streamlined cabinet in which authority would be concentrated in the hands of a few ministers. Pétain and Laval were reported to have met on Pétain's private train at La Ferté on the free side of the line dividing occupied and unoccupied France. Marshal Pétain has made no secret that France's defeat and recent events have made it necessary for France to cooperate with Germany in reorganization of continental Europe. His meeting with Laval means there has been no fluctuation in his determination to collaborate in the new order. Franco-German collaboration in any event is a firm policy on both sides of the line and, in fact, has already been given concrete expression in the last week's conferences between French and German metallurgists in Paris. There were many inexplicable elements in the ousting of Laval. For 3 weeks, in fact, up to the end of December, the political situation in Vichy was in a state of turmoil and relations between France and Germany were nebulous. Marshal Pétain wrote to Adolf Hitler a letter covering the Laval incident, and Hitler's answer has been expected for many days. Otto Abetz, Hitler's ambassador to Paris, has been standing by in Berlin. But a few days ago, he returned to Paris. This was expected to be followed by the return of the French ambassador Ferdinand de Brennan to Vichy. So far as is known, de Brennan had not returned before Laval and Pétain met. Announcement of the meeting was believed to preclude any upset between France and Germany. With his enormous prestige in all sections of France, it was believed Pétain would not have acted without having strong belief in the successful issue of his decision. Cali, Colombia, January 19th. Germany is getting potential war supplies almost within the shadow of the Panama Canal. They are flown halfway around the South American continent and then across the South Atlantic. They come from Cali, near the western coast of Colombia, a few hours flying time from Panama. Chief of the supplies is platinum, used for fine parts of precision instruments such as bomb sights and airplane gauges. It is extremely valuable in electrical gadgets, without which a modern war machine could not function. For any of these uses, a little platinum goes a long way, and approximately 13 to 15 pounds of it are flown from Cali to Germany every week on commercial planes. There is nothing secret about it. The shipments are declared openly on the usual commercial invoices. From the standpoint of international law, there is nothing irregular about it because the South American countries are neutrals. The planes carry the platinum by way of Lima, Peru, to Buenos Aires, Argentina, whence it crosses the Atlantic, reaching Germany through Italy or Switzerland. Sometimes the Atlantic crossings are made by Italian flying boats. Drugs from tropical plants also are said to reach Germany in this way. A dribble of German products reaches South America by air. Berlin, January 19th. German news services gave extended space today to the radio address of Joseph P. Kennedy, former ambassador to Great Britain. The accounts emphasized the opinion attributed to him that no extraordinary danger confronts the United States and that in any event the war in Europe is not America's war. Tokyo, January 19th. Lieutenant General Kazuma Suzuki today described the United States as the decisive factor in both the European and Asiatic conflicts. He spoke before an assembly honoring Admiral Kishiburo Nomura, the new ambassador to the United States. It is rash to conclude that China will crumble at an early date, said General Suzuki, former commander of the Japanese forces in China. Because of aid from the United States and Britain, he declared, I believe China will keep up resistance for a long period. I believe also that the European war is a long-term conflict. I believe it will be extremely difficult for Germany to carry out a successful landing campaign on British soil. The bulk of the British Navy is unharmed and larger than the German and Italian navies combined. The decisive factor in both hostilities undoubtedly is the United States. The Japanese must not be content with military preparations, but must endeavor to solve their international difficulties by means of diplomacy. Admiral Nomura reiterated his desire to do his best to improve relations between Japan and the United States. New York, January 19th. Former King Carol of Romania is so despondent he threatens to begin a fast to death on Tuesday unless he can escape from Spain by then, friends of the abdicated Romanian monarch said today. They described his plight as desperate and said a decision by the United States to deny him entry to this country might be his only salvation in the complicated legalities which hold him in a seemingly inextricable web in Spain. Carol probably is the only refugee in all Europe whose happiness depends on not getting an American visa. His friends, saying their information was from the former king's authorized representative, stated the strange situation this way. His Majesty will hunger strike to death if America does not promise Spain that the United States will under no circumstances give him a visa or go to America before the war is over. Spanish Foreign Minister Ramon Serrano sooner, they said, advised the British and American ambassadors in Madrid that Spain would let Carol go to Portugal if both their countries promised not to admit him. The British ambassador, Sir Samuel Hoare, immediately replied that Britain would give Carol no visa, his friend said, But American Ambassador Alexander W. Weddle answered that American immigration laws were not easily altered, and he believed no exception could be made for Carroll if he applied for a visa and was found eligible. The king will await a reply until Tuesday. If he does not leave Spain by then, we fear for his life. We know that he would rather die than continue his present unbearable, shameful situation, one friend said. Asked about Madame Magna Lapescu, Carroll's friend who joined him in exile, the informant answered she refuses to abandon Carroll. She will do her utmost to encourage him up to the last, whatever he decides to do or whatever happens, she will follow him. Carroll is believed to be seeking sanctuary in Portugal out of reach of Romanian Iron Guardists, whose revolution overthrew him and whose bullets sped him out of the country. The new Romanian regime has been trying to get some members of Carroll's entourage back to Romania from Spain. Why Spain would permit Carroll to go to Portugal but no further was not explained. Vichy, France, January 19th. American consular authorities today sent circulars to British subjects living in occupied France advising them to leave the country. Some 5,000 British subjects live in the free zone and are supplied with funds by American consular officials through an arrangement made some months ago between the London government and Washington, D.C. It was not disclosed whether the warning to leave foreshadowed any critical war developments or concerned difficulties which might occur in the future in making transfer of funds. The circulars told the British that it might be impossible for American consuls to continue to make payments in a short time. The British were advised that a ship will be leaving Marseilles in 3 weeks' time. It will be capable of repatriating 1,700 people. Under the present arrangement, any American consul will pay a maximum of 1,500 francs, or about $30, to any British subject in France. The French are closely watching the struggle in Washington, D.C. over President Roosevelt's War Powers Bill. They're eager to see whether these powers will include the possibility of the president being able to go to war without consulting Congress. The reason for this interest is that a parallel case existed here. Former Premier Edouard Daladier was voted plenary powers long before the outbreak of the war. According to the French Constitution, then operative, the Chamber of Deputies had to be consulted before a declaration of war could be made. One of the charges against Daladier, likely to be preferred before the Riom court, which will hear the war guilt cases, is that he went to war without consulting the Chamber. It is charged that the Daladier government based its declaration of war on the mere fact that the Chamber had voted war credits. Some say this extension of credits was equivalent to an endorsement of a war declaration. Others say it was not. Clinton, New York, January 19th. Belief that President Roosevelt was feeling his way toward an Anglo-American political union was voiced here today by Dr. Felix Morley, president of Haverford College. Dr. Morley spoke after receiving the honorary degree of Doctor of Laws from Hamilton College. Ottawa, Ontario, January 19th. Sir Gerald Campbell, British High Commissioner here, left tonight for Washington to become one of the 2 new British ministers to the United States. These ministers will assist Lord Halifax, the new British ambassador. Lady Campbell will join her husband in 2 weeks. Chongqing, China, January 20th. President Lin Sen of the Chinese Republic telegraphed congratulations today to President Roosevelt on his inauguration day. It will be 1 a.m. Tuesday in China when the president takes office for a 3rd term at noon in Washington, D.C. Sincerely hope ever-increasing cordiality which marks relations between our countries will be continued and strengthened during your administration, said the message. Also wish you the best of health and prosperity to the United States of America. Guayaquil, Ecuador, January 19th. A Western Hemisphere deal in which the United States would cooperate with Ecuador in building air and naval bases in the Galapagos Islands and help attribute the long-standing border dispute between Ecuador and Peru was reported under consideration tonight. The Ecuadorian government declined official confirmation or denial, but the story persisted in high political circles. Highly reliable information obtained at the capital at Quito indicated that number one, the United States wants bases in the Galapagos off Ecuador's Pacific coast and commanding the approach of the Panama Canal only if they can be obtained with the complete approval and cooperation of the people of Ecuador. Number two, Ecuadorian political leaders believe the people are ready to accept a proposition for bases because they are losing their fear of Yankee imperialism and feel that arming the strategically located islands would protect Ecuador as greatly as they would the United States. President Carlos Arroyo del Rio said in an interview that Ecuador desires with all fervor the defense of continental America and added, the moment has not yet come to determine the form of cooperation which Ecuador will be able to give in this defense. But when it does, Ecuador will give it within the pattern of her laws, maintaining unharmed the fullness of her sovereignty and with a broad, comprehensive spirit. An Ecuadorian argument against leasing Galapagos bases always has been that such a step might violate the sovereign guarantees of our Constitution, but under a broad construction of the Constitution, such as President Arroyo del Rio implied, the lease of bases might be declared a move to national defense. It was learned reliably that the Ecuadorian government would like to settle its border dispute with Peru, for one thing, to remove possible provocation for incidents such as the outbreak at Quito last Sunday. 2 rioters were shot dead, 17 were wounded, and 13 policemen were hurt in that disorder, which started with a demonstration in Quito and was climaxed with the stoning of the president's palace. Authorized sources in Quito said the rioting and recent border incidents were related. Quito sources said Ecuador was willing to have the border issue arbitrated if such a proposal were acceptable to Peru, but did not want to risk a rebuff and would like to have the moral support of the United States. It was said that both the border dispute and the Galapagos problem were in a state of negotiation. Mexico City, January 19th. A high government official said today that President Manuel Avila Camacho's administration would welcome an exclusive arrangement with the United States that would dry up the stream of essential war metals now flowing to the Axis from Mexico. The idea is that the United States should purchase the Republic's entire production to build up reserve stocks. It was reported in diplomatic quarters that such a program was being studied by the American government, but that no decision had been reached because statistical information was not complete. The official informant said the government was deeply concerned over Mexico's part in supplying the war machines of Japan and, as is generally believed, Germany, but that nothing could be done by Mexico alone to change this because the mining industry is depressed. He indicated, however, that the administration was prepared to make concessions in reducing the price of metals concerned should the United States undertake an exclusive contract. Hundreds of tons of Mexican lead, copper, zinc, manganese, and antimony sail out of Mexican Pacific ports each month for the Orient, and it is believed here that a substantial percentage of these shipments reach Germany by way of Russia. Mercury exports alone, it is said, amount to $250,000 a month. The revenue now obtained from Axis exports, informed sources asserted, is essential to the stability of the Mexican mining industry. An embargo on Axis shipments, unless markets are assured in the United States, independent sources assert, could not be ordered without causing the mining industry to collapse. Already confronted with the problem of how to liquidate deficits in the government-controlled petroleum and railway industries, Mexico by herself lacks means of cushioning her most important industry, mining, without United States aid, it was said. There have been no negotiations with the United States, it was said. New York, January 19th. 1,000 American soldiers already are at the recently acquired United States base at Newfoundland. It was disclosed today by Louis E. Emerson, Commissioner of Defense for Newfoundland. He said American architects and engineers are there, and that although plans call for completion of construction at the base in 18 months, work is being rushed and may be finished sooner. Emerson and John H. Pension, Commissioner of Finance of Newfoundland, left unexpectedly on the Atlantic Clipper for Lisbon en route to London to take part in final negotiations on the base in Newfoundland, one of several acquired from Great Britain by the United States in exchange for 50 destroyers. Also aboard the Quick Clipper was a three-man State Department commission going to London to confer on the 99-year leases. The men are Charles Fahey, Assistant Solicitor General, Colonel Harry J. Maloney, United States Army Field Artillery, and Commander Harold Reismeyer, United States Navy. London, January 20th. A German raider crashed in flames on an English farm last night, killing the 4 members of its crew and bringing to 3 the number of Nazi planes reported destroyed in scattered aerial activity. 1 German plane was reported brought down in southern England, and a German bomber shot down into the English Channel by British fighter planes late yesterday. A raid alarm sounded in London shortly after blackout time last night. Listeners heard what seemed to be a lone raider. There were only 2 gunfire bursts before midnight, and the all clear sounded about 2 hours after midnight. Raiding aircraft were reported near a town in western England, and a large number of raiders approached a south coast town showering down firebombs. Watchers and volunteers soon extinguished them. During the daylight hours, a single bomber attacked an east coast town in the morning, causing little damage but a few casualties, it was stated. The weather over the Strait of Dover was unsettled, with a strong southwester blowing up a choppy sea. The daylight visibility was good except for a mist which obscured the French coast. There were no reports by evening on any British offensive action on the continent. Alexandria, Egypt, January 19th. An English clergyman is running a nightclub for British tars at this great African base because he doesn't want them to get gypped. The Reverend Alan Spender, 29 years old, said that when he came here in 1939, he found prices soaring 100% and seamen had no place to go to get clean, wholesome entertainment, so I decided to do something about it. He converted a 150-year-old Greek hospital into a naval club and built a huge addition to house a nightclub, bars, lounge bedrooms, and concert halls. Now the smiling, broad-shouldered ex-rector from Birmingham is resident chaplain of the Alexandria Fleet Club, which daily serves 4,000 meals and 12,000 bottles of beer. American singers and dancers are featured in the nightclub show, including Frederick Victor of Columbus, Indiana. Berlin, January 19th. A new decree issued in Germany today provides that Jews must pay a special social equalization tax amounting to 15% of their income on top of their regular income tax. The minimum income tax of most Jews who still have an income amounts to 10%, which brings the minimum taxation up to 25% of their income if they earn more than $660 a year. On top of that, they must pay the war surtax. The German Zeitung in Norway declares big contingents of Jewish immigrants are expected in Tokyo from Poland, the Baltic states, and Norway. A monthly average of 500 Jews is expected to pass through Yokohama in the next 6 months. Most of them are headed for the United States. Germany has requested Portugal to allow 3 field trains to enter its territory from occupied France. These trains will carry Jews who are able to secure visas and transportation to the Americas. Belgrade, Yugoslavia, January 20th. Dispatches to Belgrade newspapers reported today that a German general staff officer had been slain in Bucharest and a former professional boxer of Greek origin had been arrested as his assailant. 5 shots were said to have been fired into the officer on a busy thoroughfare only 2 blocks from the Romanian Royal Palace, now used as headquarters for the German General Staff. The victim was identified as a Major Doring, said to have held a position of importance in the so-called Nazi Expeditionary Force in Romania. He fell dead at the entrance to the Hotel Ambassador. Dispatches to Belgrade newspapers reported that Bucharest police said the boxer told them he quarreled with the officer in a cafe and killed him. And now back to national news. Washington, D.C., January 19th. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation made approximately $1,100,000,000 in defense commitments between June and mid-January, Jesse H. Jones, federal loan administrator, reported today to President Roosevelt and Congress. Of this amount, Midwestern industrial firms and other enterprises connected with national defense received commitments totaling $208,484,283. Included in this total was $60,717,235 to 6 Illinois firms. Jones gave this summary of loans by RFC subsidiaries. Rubber Reserve Company arranged to purchase 430,000 tons of crude rubber for $190 million, 52,516 tons delivered. Metals Reserve Company arranged to purchase about 2,700,000 tons of metals at a cost of $376,724,200. These metals include antimony, chrome ore, copper, graphite, tungsten trioxide, tin, and manganese core. Defense Plant Corporation commitments totaling $349,779,683, of which $283,206,197 is for construction of plants and acquisition of machinery to manufacture airplanes and parts, and $35,550,000 for machine tools. Defense Supplies Corporation allocated $50 million for the purchase of high-test aviation gasoline, $5,400,000 for 300,000 tons of nitrate of soda to be bought in Chile, and $12 million for the transportation and storage in the United States of 250 million pounds of Australian wool. London, January 19th. A fast new American-built fighter plane outflew a captured German Messerschmitt in a mock air battle arranged as a closely studied test. The British pilot who flew the American-made plane, one of the latest models to reach Britain, termed it more maneuverable than a British Spitfire, but needing more guns. One expert who looked on expressed a wish for still more motor power for speed and altitude. The American plane, its make and type not identified, was pitted against a Messerschmitt 110 twin-engine fighter. They dived and twisted like specks of quicksilver in the sunny winter sky, while a lone British Hurricane circled above to make sure that no passing patrol thought it was a real dogfight and joined in. When the British pilot stepped from the American plane after the sham battle, he said to the Messerschmitt pilot, "Good show, but if you had stayed to fight, you wouldn't have had a chance. My kite was beautifully maneuverable and would turn inside a Spitfire, but its armament is a bit light to our conservative way of thinking. I'd feel happier with at least 8 guns of that caliber." The number of machine guns on the American-built plane was not disclosed. Most British fighter planes are equipped with 8. Britain's Superfighter of the Air for battles this spring will be what one Air Force officer called the daddy of all Spitfires. The plane is known as the Spitfire III and is called a remarkable development of the original Spitfire. Britain's term of the most formidable fighter planes in the world has known will be re-engined and re-armed Hurricanes, new Tornadoes, new Whirlwinds, and improved Defiance, it was disclosed. The speed of the Spitfire III will be far in excess of 400 miles an hour, it was said. It will be armed with cannons and machine guns more deadly than before. Indications are that the crack fighter on the Nazi side will be a greatly improved Heinkel 113. Also, a probable new Focke-Wulf fighter will make its debut, the Daily Mail said. McCord Field, Washington, January 19th. Still without a definite clue, ground clues and aerial searchers converged on a southwest Washington wooded area today in the hunt for a United States Army bomber, missing since Thursday with 7 aboard. Officers of the Air Corps said the search centered in an area bounded roughly by the headwaters of the Cowlitz River on the north and the Columbia River on the south, and from the Pacific Highway between Seattle and Portland to the summit of the Cascade Mountain Range. Washington, D.C., January 19th. William S. Knudsen, Director General of the Office of Production Management, appealed today for an all-out performance of American ingenuity, backed by every machine and piece of equipment available to supply the needs of the defense program. In a letter to Walter D. Fuller, president of the National Association of Manufacturers, Knudsen urged industry to cooperate in supplying information for a national census of plants and equipment, which the association and affiliated organizations comprising the National Industrial Council are sponsoring. I am counting, as I am sure you are, Knudsen wrote, on every manufacturer and machine shop proprietor in the nation, no matter how large or small, considering it a patriotic duty to supply the information requested, and I am confident that you will receive 100% cooperation both from the largest and the smallest shops. The inventory will be taken from January 19th to the 25th, a period designated by the sponsors as Preparedness Through Production Week. Knudsen predicted that through this census, industry would forge a new powerful tool in the form of vital information for the defense of the nation. In a statement making public the Knudsen letter, the association said the inventory would answer these questions among others. Number one, how many milling machines, gear cutting machines, lathes, etc. are being used part-time or not at all? Number two, what is the extent of our total facilities for receiving and shipping goods at manufacturing centers? Our total industrial railroad facilities? Total power generating resources at the plants? Number three, how many skilled, semi-skilled, and unskilled workers, male and female, does the nation have? How many shifts do they work in what numbers of plants? How many workers are being taught new skills through company-sponsored training programs? Washington, D.C., January 19th. In a debate on the National Radio Forum tonight on the Roosevelt War Powers Bill, Senator Waylon Brooks, Republican Illinois, pronounced the whole Roosevelt foreign policy one that is bound to lead directly into war. The steps so far taken, he said, are the following. First, changing our neutrality law, which allows us to sell arms for cash and carry. Second, advocating all aid short of war. Third, advocating selling regardless of cash. Fourth, dropping all thought of short of war. Fifth, passing this bill, which abdicates congressional authority, supersedes existing laws, and grants full authority to one man to create, use, or dispose of all elements of our national defense as he alone sees fit. Sixth, authorizing the performance of acts which will create incidents that will make our active participation in the war a certainty. The pending measure, said the senator, is not a Lend-Lease bill, but a take-away-for-keeps bill designed to take away the responsibilities of Congress and place them in the hands of forces that for 8 years have tried constantly through various other means to centralize these powers in single hands. It is a leap into dictatorship and a double-time march into fighting, shooting, participation in another European war. The overwhelming public opinion is for aiding England short of war. Overwhelming public opinion does not favor our entry into the war unless or until we are attacked, and an overwhelming majority of the American people does not wish to send our ships flying American flags, manned by men in the United States Navy, into the war zone where they will invite attack. Norman Thomas, socialist leader, warned yesterday that President Roosevelt's War Powers Bill places unprecedented powers in the executive branch of the government and is a threat to democracy. Thomas spoke from New York on the University of Chicago Roundtable radio program. Almost the worst thing that can happen to democracy, Thomas said, is for it to slide crabwise into war. The Lend-Lease bill shows democracy in surrender. If Mr. Roosevelt had been as calm in his leadership in this crisis as he was in the peace crisis of 1933, we would be a lot better off. We have been cultivating hysteria by talking about crises. Professor Harold D. Lasswell, Washington political scientist, said America's greatest problems are internal rather than international. Edward L. Bernays, New York public relations counselor, said there is no chance for democracies being achieved under the dictatorship necessary for the prosecution of war. Boston, Massachusetts, January 19th. Vern Marshall, chairman of the No Foreign War Committee, asserted tonight that reports of Britain's exhaustion of her dollar credits in the United States are baby talk. Speaking in historic Faneuil Hall, the Cedar Rapids, Iowa editor told the American Mothers Neutrality League that England has in this country remaining credits sufficient to make many times the cash purchases made by her of us since the beginning of the war. Reputable economists, he said, had set Britain's credits here in excess of $7 billion, and that on top of this huge sum, England has more than 15 billion available credits elsewhere and outside the British Isles. Washington, D.C., January 19th. The Brookings Institution recommended today that the method of apportioning members of the House of Representatives be based on votes cast instead of on population as at present. This would have to be done by constitutional amendment. A study prepared for the private research organization by Lawrence F. Schmembeyer said that the percentage of votes to representatives in 1938 was 29.6 for the entire country, 36.6 for the northern and western states, and 6.8 for the southern states. It took only 35,439 votes to elect 7 representatives in Mississippi in 1938, the study continued, whereas 730,024 votes were required in Kansas to elect the same number. San Francisco, California, January 19th. 2 United States Navy seamen who tore a Nazi flag from the German consulate yesterday were ordered released from jail tonight on a writ of habeas corpus obtained by 2 American Legion officials. Superior Court Judge I.M. Golden signed the writ on petition of Alan L. Graham, judge advocate of a Legion post, and William E. Barden, commander of another Legion post and presiding commissioner of the Superior Court. Both are lawyers. They declared that instead of being liable for punishment for malicious mischief as charged, the sailors, Harold James Sturtevant, 22 years old, of Haverhill, Massachusetts, and E.G. Lackey, 23, of Charlotte, North Carolina, should be commended for preventing a felony. They asserted that under the section of the Military and Veterans Code of California, the display of the flag by the German consulate was illegal. This section declares it a felony to display any device or emblem which is an invitation or a stimulus to anarchist action or as an aid to propaganda of any organization that advocates the overthrow of this government. Graham said Adolf Hitler advocated overthrow of the government of all democracies. Sturtevant recently was a fireman on the United States destroyer Craven. Lackey had been attached to the destroyer Perkins. Both were in civilian clothes on leave, awaiting release from enlistment because of disability. Explaining the flag snatching incident, Sturtevant said, "Me and Lackey flipped a coin to see where we would go. Taking the route directed by the coin, they looked upward and saw a crowd was staring at the swastika flag. So we climbed up and cut it loose. That's all," Sturtevant said. Los Angeles, California, January 19th. A federal court jury was still out tonight in the case of 9 leaders of the I Am movement accused of mail fraud. The case went to the jury at 6:30 p.m. last Thursday. Nyack, New York, January 19th. Percy W. Whittlesley, 45 years old, who had been active recently in a pro-British committee, was critically wounded today in his luxurious home overlooking the Hudson River, and police immediately began a search with bloodhounds for an 18-year-old houseboy identified by District Attorney George V. Dorsey as Walter Groabley. Whittlesley, until recently secretary to the fabulous Pierre A. Bernard, once known as the Omnipotent to his followers in the cult of Tantric, was shot 6 times with bullets in his chest and mouth. Leaving a trail of blood, Whittlesley staggered 600 yards to a school operated by the Nyack Missionary Alliance, where he was found by a student who took him to a hospital. In Groabley's quarters, police said they found a diary which contained evidence that Groabley was a Nazi sympathizer. Whittlesley was described as having a 50-50 chance to survive. He is a Harvard graduate and a member of the British Institute of Philosophical Studies. Tacoma, Washington, January 19th. Dr. Ralph Falk of Boise, Idaho, came to Tacoma today and joined a search for his 15-year-old daughter, Carol, missing since yesterday noon from exclusive Annie Wright Seminary. He said he had no clues. Police officers and school officials declined to comment on the disappearance. In order to the Washington State Patrol to watch for the girl had not been recalled today. She was described by friends as 5 feet 6 inches tall, weighing 150 pounds, with brown hair and brown eyes. New York, January 19th. Locked in each other's arms, Mrs. Caroline Hartwell Patterson, 27 years old, and Israel Hurwitz, age 41, both formerly of Boston, Massachusetts, jumped underneath a subway train today. The woman was killed, and Hurwitz, who landed beneath her, lost his right leg. As Hurwitz was being carried away, he tried to fling himself off a stretcher and onto the tracks again. He told police he is married to a woman who had become an invalid. Mrs. Patterson, he said, was married to a man who is in a tuberculosis sanitarium and has an 8-year-old daughter, Eugenia, in an institution in Belfast, Maine. Hurwitz and Mrs. Patterson met several months ago. They fell in love. Differences of religion, their tangled marital status, and their joblessness convinced them that they could never get married. So they hitchhiked to New York, took a room in a Lower East Side rooming house, and then determined to kill themselves. Norfolk, Virginia, January 19th. The 73-foot motor yacht named Adventure, owned by Cornelius Vanderbilt Whitney of New York, went down today in choppiness about 20 miles off the winter quarter lightship to which she was being towed by the Boston collier A.L. Kent. A passenger unidentified and 5 members of the crew were safely aboard the collier, which had taken the yacht in tow when she became disabled early this morning, 15 miles north of Cape Charles, Virginia. Coast Guard cutters and a plane were en route to give aid before the sinking was reported. The Adventure was under charter to George M. Francis of Teaneck, New Jersey. Francis was not aboard. And now for local and regional news. Joseph P. Kennedy, the retiring ambassador to Great Britain, has given the answer to those who are trying to push the United States into war by crying that England is our first and main line of defense, General Thomas S. Hammond, chairman of the Chicago chapter of the America First Committee, declared yesterday. Commenting on Kennedy's nationwide broadcast of Saturday, General Hammond said the ambassador's stay out of war warning further spurred efforts of the America First Committee. When one so close to the theater of operations, in a position to obtain the real facts at first hand, agrees so completely with the views of the America First Committee, it is most encouraging to all who believe that the United States still is a great nation, General Hammond said. Ambassador Kennedy pointed out that we are a country of 130 million people with a record for vigor, ingenuity, and bravery. He could not understand why even a great military machine 3,000 miles away should make us fear for our safety. As a veteran of the AEF, I too had been unable to understand all this hysteria. Modern warfare is highly mechanized. The name of the United States is synonymous with mechanization. We can meet anybody at that game and beat them decisively unless we give away all our equipment. Ambassador Kennedy agrees with us that it would be better if England wins the war, but questions whether our whole civilization would not be threatened if, in trying to help England, we get ourselves into the war ourselves. There can be no doubt but that democracy as we know it will vanish from this American continent if we go into this war. That we will be in the war and quickly is certain if House Bill 1776, the dictatorship bill, is passed by Congress. The bill is designed for that purpose. Churchill, meaning Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of England, left the way open for a plea for American troops in 1942, and that's when England wants to invade the continent with about 3 million of our American boys. With more than 165,000 names recorded on protests being sent to Washington, D.C. against passage of the president's bill, 40 volunteers continued yesterday their mobilization, the objections to the measure. An appeal for funds with which to carry on this work for postage and printing was made yesterday by Mrs. Janet Ayer Fairbank, vice chairman of the Chicago chapter. She says small contributions from patriotic Americans must keep the drive and progress against the well-financed propaganda machine of the Committee to Defend America by aiding the Allies. Money may be sent to her at room 901 122 South Michigan Avenue. The drive for signatures to petitions and for names to be placed on lists sent to Congress by the committee still is going ahead full blast, Mrs. Fairbanks said. Persons may either write or telephone the committee. The telephone numbers are Wabash 5473, 5474, 5475, 5476, and 5477. Robert P. Patterson, Assistant Secretary of War, yesterday called upon American labor for full cooperation to prepare the United States for all emergencies and to see that maximum help reaches England. This nation cannot afford the loss of one day's production at any of the plants turning out military essentials, he said in an address before the Chicago Federation of Labor in Musicians Hall, 175 West Washington Street. The time is too short for such wastefulness. Patterson said the best possible guarantee of swift, efficient production is the cooperation of labor given in the spirit of free partnership, and promised that the social gains won by labor would be preserved. To reach the point where our democracy is no longer in danger requires national unity, and for unity we must have industrial peace, he said. In time of peril, voluntary arbitration is by far the most satisfactory method for adjudicating differences between industry and labor. The Air Corps Technical School at Chanute Field, Rantoul, Illinois, is seeking 1,725 men for training as airplane mechanics, welders, machinists, and metal workers, Air Corps headquarters announced yesterday. Students will receive $21 a month plus clothing and living expenses. Applicants must be between 18 and 35 years old, single with no dependents, and have a high school education or its equivalent. Enlistment is for 3 years. The largest order placed with Chicago companies last week by the government under the National Defense Program was that received by Diamond T Motor Car Company. The total for all Chicago area companies was $6,398,964. In addition, $920,000 of expansion by a gear company was approved by the Navy. Diamond T Motors' order was for $3,112,360 of trucks. Foot Brothers Gear and Machine Company received the approval for expansion when the Navy authorized it to raise its equipment program to $1,940,000 from a previously approved figure of $1,020,000. The company is making gears for other companies which are supplying aviation engines to the Navy. The Chicago Association of Commerce reported the following other orders for the week. Kennedy Van Swan Manufacturing and Engineering Company, wheel assemblies, $11,366. Kessler Solder Company, solder, $6,704. Littman and Company, subsistence stores, $555. Marshall and Huchart Machinery Company, machines, $9,004. McGraw Electric Company, Elgin, for toasters, $65,570. Paving Supply and Equipment Company, diesel power tractors, $8,848. CFP's Company, lamp assemblies, $38,869. Quaker Oats Company, cereals, $681. Reliance Manufacturing Company, cotton khaki shirts, $182,685. Richardson Company, Melrose Park, insulating material, $8,970. Taylor Tubes Incorporated, tubes, $53,200. Attorney General George F. Barrett, voicing a determination to raise his department to a new peak of efficiency, said yesterday that he has started to clear out political deadwood and that he is establishing a division to help the Federal Bureau of Investigation combat sabotage. One of those fired by Barrett is Sidney Deutsch, who was sponsored by Alderman Jacob M. Avery, Westside Democratic chieftain. Barrett said Deutsch was on the payroll at $3,240 a year, but spent most of his time operating a currency exchange on the first floor of the building at 160 North LaSalle Street, where the Attorney General's office occupies the 20th floor. Nominally, this man was a sales tax case investigator, Barrett said. Actually, he ran a currency exchange. This is an example of why the work was not being done. I will have no room for any man or woman who will not pitch in and do the state's business. The first thing I did upon taking office was to get a list of the cases which had been assigned to the Assistant Attorneys General and to order them to submit reports on each case. I found some had only 5 cases while others had 80 or 90. Some were doing nothing while others were overloaded. Barrett said there is more than enough work for all employees and that it must be done. The new Attorney General declared he intends to employ men who measure up to the standards set by the assistants of District Attorney Thomas E. Dewey of New York. Adding to the normal work of the office is the necessity of that we establish a division to cooperate with the FBI in protecting our defense structure, Barrett said. Evidence has been disclosed that there are persons in Illinois who are a menace to our industrial plants, our railroads, and other defense equipment. Barrett said investigators in the new division will be primarily responsible to him, but will give all possible aid to the FBI in tracing down reports of subversive activities. The only final hope for the existence of the 5 small European democracies now under Nazi domination is British victory, but it will be an empty victory, Chauncey McCormick declared yesterday if, meantime, a generation needlessly is allowed to perish. McCormick, a member of the National Committee on Food for the 5 Small Democracies and chairman of its Midwest Division, spoke from the pulpit of the First Presbyterian Church at Wheaton at the invitation of its minister, the Reverend Robert B. Stewart. The object of the committee, he said, is to find a practical plan to get food to the starving people in Finland, Norway, Holland, Belgium, Central Poland, without weakening the military effectiveness of the British blockade. The food would be purchased by the governments in exile of these countries. Today, he continued, the hungry of Europe are being told by German propagandists that democracy doesn't care about their plight and that the sooner they give in to dictatorship and slavery, the sooner they can eat. 2 women yesterday joined the executive board of the committee's Midwest Division. They are Mrs. Byron Harvey and Mrs. Herbert E. Bradley. Richard Pennington Lewis, 22 years old, who said he is a member of a wealthy St. Paul, Minnesota family and a deserter from the United States Marines, was in custody of the Chicago Avenue Police last night on a charge of passing more than a dozen bogus checks for between $200 and $300 in various hotels, night spots, and taverns since January 4th. Lewis said he used the money to have a good time as he was tired of service in the Marines. He said he joined the Marines a year ago and was stationed at San Diego, California, but decided to desert after a furlough ended last December 23rd. Lewis told police he posed as a lieutenant in order to cash most of the checks. He was arrested after Raymond Dubois, 526 Addison Street, a county employee, became suspicious when Lewis got him to cash a $10 check, then borrowed $10 and finally asked to borrow his watch. Joseph Kamikowski, 38 years old, 1540 Augusta Boulevard, a sheet metal worker, was held in the Racine Avenue Police Station last night following the death yesterday in County Hospital of his wife, Teresa, 34. In a deathbed statement, Mrs. Kamikowski said she had been beaten by her husband. Police said Kamikowski admitted he had struck his wife several times Friday when she interrupted a drinking party. Mount Carmel, Illinois, January 19th. Jumbo Adams, picturesque old riverman who made Wabash River history 35 years ago by finding a pearl that went into a necklace for the Queen of England, was stabbed to death today. Jumbo, who was 61 years old, was sleeping on his houseboat pulled on a vacant lot 4 blocks from the river when his riverman comrade, Ed Belcher, returned with a bottle of liquor and a mess of fish. Ed wanted Jumbo to help clean the fish. Jumbo wanted to sleep. They fought for a while, Jumbo with an axe and Ed with a butcher knife. Ed finally killed Jumbo with a thrust through the back. Then Ed roamed the neighborhood explaining that he had killed Jumbo and asking to be locked up, but no one would believe him. It was hours before Ed got into the Wabash County Jail. The story of the pearl was recalled by Judge Clarence Partee of the county court and confirmed in Chicago by H.M. Phipps of 7603 Sheridan Road, who was then Wabash County State's attorney. Jumbo, whose real name was William, got into the clam business when it was new here. He specialized in searching the clam shells for pearls that he could sell for a good price. One morning he found the biggest pearl anyone hereabouts had ever seen. He started for the business district with it. On the way, he met a physician who bought it for $800. Jumbo spent the money in a hurry on liquor and returned to his clamming. Some time later, he met an enemy riding in a buggy. Jumbo stepped in front of the horse and began shooting. His enemy could have shot him, but was afraid of shooting the horse, and so the enemy, Hankus Pate, fell dead before Jumbo's fire. Prosecutor Phipps sent Jumbo to the penitentiary on a murder charge. When he was paroled 8 years later, there were stories that the Queen of England, pleased with his pearl, had interceded. But Phipps said tonight that this was untrue. The physician, Phipps said, sold the pearl to Tiffany's in New York. It brought $10,000 in Paris, where it was made into the Queen's necklace. Phipps doubts, however, that the Queen ever knew about Jumbo. A carpenter known as Joseph Brobny, about 35 years old, was found dead yesterday in a Dunes cottage 3 miles northwest of Chesterton, Indiana, where he had lived for the last 4 months. Detective Arthur Keller of the Indiana State Police said he believed the man had died of natural causes, although Keller was investigating the possibility of suicide. Papers found in Brobny's cottage indicated he was a Russian and that immigration authorities at St. Paul, Minnesota were threatening to deport him. 2 Chicago addresses were found among his papers, but persons living at those addresses did not know him. Escanaba, Michigan, January 19th. A ski-equipped plane manned by a reserve officer in the Army Air Corps went to the rescue today of 2 commercial fishermen adrift on a huge ice floe in Green Bay off Portage Point. The flyer, Lieutenant Walter Arntzen of Escanaba, declared it was no trick at all to land his plane on the drifting ice and take off again with his 2 passengers. The floe was 2 miles long and about a mile wide. The fishermen, Earl Johnson and Hugo Lindquist, had been engaged in fishing through a hole in the ice when the big floe broke loose from shore. They had drifted about a quarter of a mile before either noticed it. An observer who saw their plight notified a lighthouse keeper who was summoned aid from Escanaba. Arntzen has gained considerable fame for his mercy flights with medical aid or to remove stricken persons from isolated places to city hospitals. Chicago lags behind other large American cities in providing free medical clinics for needy persons, according to a report published by the Council of Social Agencies. The report stated that New York City offers 5 times as much free clinical service as does Chicago, although it is only twice as much population, and that Boston, Massachusetts, Detroit, Michigan, Milwaukee, and Los Angeles County, California, offer services equal to Chicago, although each has a substantially smaller population. Conditions in the clinics, which are described as taxed far beyond capacity, are described by the councils of social agencies as follows. Patients who are sick and bandied from one clinic to another and back, diagnosis is frequently delayed. Funds for free eyeglasses and appliances are inadequate. Patients needing dental care have little hope of getting it, particularly dentures. Patients must wait long periods in overcrowded clinics. For the Negro, the lack of facilities is particularly great. Some clinic departments are booked weeks and months in advance. The report estimates that the work of voluntary clinics supported by private funds and serving both indigent and paying patients has doubled in the last decade. During this time, the amount of free work has increased 4 or 5 times. Despite this apparent discrepancy, there is little evidence that persons who can pay are getting free service, the report said. A survey of patients served in 16 of the city's general clinics showed that in January 1939, only 3.9% of those assisted without charge had resources adequate to pay for medical attention. Some of this number received free attention because of their ailments of a rare variety that encouraged experiment or study. Others are served free because the prescribed treatment was costly and prolonged. Among the 4,502 cases analyzed, 2,039, or 45.2%, of those admitted to the clinics came from self-supporting families on or near the margin of subsistence. Of the others, 2,067 came from families on relief. It was shown in the report that during 1939, patients made 2,683,080 visits to the 25 clinics operating in Chicago. Almost half of these visits were made to special clinics, those specializing in a single ailment. There are 9 of these in the city devoted chiefly to tuberculosis, venereal disease, and eye and ear disorders. Almost all their work is tax-supported. Only 2 of the general clinics, those where any complaint is investigated, are tax-supported. These are the Cook County Hospital, the Research and Educational Clinic maintained by the University of Illinois. The remaining general clinics are maintained by universities, hospitals, medical schools, and charitable agencies. The Chicago Relief Administration and Community Fund contribute to the support of 13 of these. The solution to the problem of inadequate free clinical facilities, the report said, lies in the establishment of more tax-supported clinics. Branch dispensaries of Cook County Hospital, located on the far north and the far south and the far west side, together with reorganization of the Cook County Hospital Clinic to provide a more complete service, would result in an enormous improvement, the report said. The Oak Park and River Forest Circle of the Infant Welfare will sponsor a lecture by Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd to be given at the Oak Park High School on Wednesday night at 8:15 o'clock. Mrs. Clifford Postlewaite is president of the group. And in sports, a crowd of 17,306, including several hundred standees, last night fluctuated through the thrills and chills as the Blackhawks twice absorbed 2-goal deficits to effect a 4-4 overtime tie with the high-scoring Boston Bruins in a National Hockey League battle in Chicago Stadium. Despite the deadlock, the Hawks dropped to 5th place behind the Rangers, who beat Detroit. Art Wiebe and Doug Bentley scored goals in a span of 37 seconds after the 15-minute mark in the first period to balance 2 goals the Bruins had made after the 12-minute mark in the session. The Bruins, who have scored 90 goals this season to 61 for the Hawks, scored twice in the second period, and the 4-2 lead thus achieved persisted until 12:54 in the final regular period, when George Allen closed the gap. Phil Hergesheimer socked home the tying score with 1 minute and 40 seconds of the regular time remaining. The scoreless overtime then followed, and the Bruins apparently happy to settle for a tie. It was the second Major League standoff in which those 2 fine goalie grads of Everleigh, Minnesota High School have performed. Sammy Lepresti made his big league debut against Frank Brismick of the Bruins in Boston on January 5th and emerged with a 2-2 deadlock. There wasn't a goal by either side until Art Jackson, assisted by Milt Schmidt, and Bobby Bauer scored in 12:09, while Earl Siebert was off for tripping. Goalie Lepresti had kicked away shots by Schmidt and Bauer, then sprawled in an effort to smother the puck. Something akin to a sob went up from the big crowd when Crawford picked it out of the pile-up in front of the cage and lifted it into the unguarded nets. Some 3 minutes after the first Boston goal, Ray Conacher made the score 2-0. Conacher broke along the left boards and called for a long lateral that caught the Hawks' defense completely out of position. He picked up the pass with no opposition, beat Lepresti with a mean oblique shot. The time of the second Boston goal was at 15:45, and exactly 1 minute later, the Hawks had cut the lead in 2. 37 seconds after their first goal, the Hawks tallied again to tie. The first Chicago goal was a long, hard one by Wiebe from his left boards 8 feet inside the blue line. Curly Dahlstrom and Doug Bentley earned assists. The time was 16:45. At the 17-minute mark, Doug Bentley, Dahlstrom, and Hergesheimer led down a furious barrage on goalie Brismick, and Bentley getting the goal and tied the score. Dahlstrom and Hergesheimer won assists. The Bruins broke the 2-2 tie in 9:46 of the second period on Cowley's pass to Conacher, and the Bruins resumed the lead. With 2 minutes to go in the same period, Gordon Bruce was put off for tripping, but the Hawks' resultant power play backfired twice. Reardon was thwarted by Lepresti's miracle save on a breakaway dash to the cage, but on another breakaway, Jackson and Reardon bore down on top of Lepresti, Jackson scoring in 1936. The third Hawk goal was scored by Allen in 12:34 of the third period on assist by Siebert and Bill Karst. The tying goal was out of a melee, but involved calm, lightning action by Hergesheimer, who clicked in at 18:20. Doug Bentley and Dahlstrom were awarded assists. Detroit, Michigan, January 19th. The New York Rangers scored 2 last-period goals to defeat the crippled Red Wings 2-1 in their first National Hockey League victory on Olympia ice since February 23, 1939. Phil Watson and Matt Colville counted the Rangers twice defeated and thrice tied by the Red Wings earlier this season, came from behind to disappoint a crowd of 10,256 who had come to cheer the skidding Detroit team. The Detroit roster was cut to 13 men by injuries. New York, January 19th. Charlie Conacher, booming long drives from the right boards, forced openings through which 3 goals were scored tonight and led the New York Americans from a 2-goal deficit to a 3-3 tie with Toronto before 10,871 in a National Hockey League game. Both teams benefited by the tie. The Leafs pulled a point ahead of the defeated Detroit Red Wings, stretching their first-place margin to 2 games, while the American closed to 4 points, the gap that separates them from the 6th-place Montreal Canadiens. And here are the standings in the National Hockey League. In first place, the Toronto Maple Leafs. They have won 17, lost 8, tied 2 for 36 points. The Detroit Red Wings, 12, 9, and 8 for 32 points. Boston Bruins, 11, 7, and 9 for 31 points. The New York Rangers, 10, 12, and 7 for 27 points. The Chicago Blackhawks, 10, 11, and 6 for 26 points. The Montreal Canadiens, 10, 15, and 3 for 23 points. The New York Americans, 6, 14, and 7 for 19 points. 3 Western Conference basketball squads, Northwestern Michigan and Chicago, will try again tonight to win a Big Ten game. The Wildcats, defeated in overtime Saturday night on their home court by Illinois, will meet Iowa in Iowa City. Wisconsin comes to the University of Chicago Fieldhouse, and Minnesota moves to Michigan. The Gophers whipped Chicago Saturday 35-24 for their second conference victory. Wisconsin's triumph over Michigan Saturday indicates that Minnesota should master the Wolverines since the Northmen already have beaten the Badgers. Iowa holds a victory over Minnesota. Against Minnesota tonight, Coach Bernie Osterbond's experiment of using Jim Grissom at one forward position probably will be carried on by Michigan, despite the fact that Grissom failed to score a field goal Saturday against Wisconsin. His performance was better, however, than those of other forwards since Bob Fitzgerald, a regular, was put out by illness. Sophomore Mel Coleman also may play a larger part in Michigan's game with the Gophers. When Jim Mandler, regular center, acquired 3 personal fouls early in Saturday's contest, Coleman replaced him and scored 11 points. The undefeated Big Ten leaders, Ohio State and Indiana, still are idle in the conference, although the Buckeyes see action Saturday at Wisconsin. Ohio State met the Quins Saturday, however, and became the first quintet to defeat the previously unbeaten Dukes. Tonight in Pittsburgh, DePaul's touring Blue Demons will learn if they can duplicate the triumph. By their victory over Northwestern, the Illini definitely have established themselves as within striking distance of the leaders. Indiana defeated Illinois, but Illinois has beaten Purdue, Michigan, and Northwestern. The Wildcats had a splendid opportunity to stop the Illini Saturday night, for they overcame a 13-8 deficit in the first half to lead 21-18. Moreover, they built up a 7-point advantage and won into the final minute of play, leading 36-32. Harold Shapiro's 2 field goals, the second after a brilliant individual defensive play, tied the score. In the thrilling overtime period, Illinois won 42-41, but only after Clarence Haase, who was fouled a second before the gun ended play, missed the first of two free throws that might have deadlocked the score again. Northwestern now has the unique and disastrous distinction of having lost to the first three teams in the standings. The Wildcats may never play a better game than they did against Illinois, for it was sufficient to match any conference quintet, the possible exception of Indiana. Gene Englund, with 11 points, paced Wisconsin's third victory in 4 games. The Badgers' superior height was a decisive factor, for it meant a greater number of scoring opportunities. Peoria, Illinois, January 19th. The Chicago Bruins of the National Basketball League defeated the Rossiter Motor Quintet of Peoria today 31-24. Bill Happick, former Illinois star, led the Bruins, and Harry Combes, also a former Illini, was best for the losers. The Bruins return to league play Wednesday night when they end the first half of the National League schedule against Oshkosh in Chicago. San Francisco, California, January 19th. The State Athletic Commission yesterday gave official sanction to a heavyweight championship match between Joe Louis and Arturo Godoy in Hollywood on April 15th. It will be the third meeting between Louis and Godoy, the South American who lost by decision in the first meeting and was knocked out in their second. Orlando, Florida, January 19th. Come summer, Van Lingo is confident his famous fastball once again will be blazing like the midday sun. His 1941 contract already signed, the 29-year-old Brooklyn right-hander said today the specialist at Johns Hopkins had fixed his salary arm. He added that he was gunning for nothing less than a starter's role. I'll be good for at least 250 innings this summer, he asserted. Right now I feel better than I have in 3 years. That arm hasn't bothered me since the operation last season. Sure, we'll be in there with anybody's team for the pennant, and Mungo is going to be taking his regular pitching turn again this year. I'll be shooting for 20 victories, but I know I'll get in 250 innings, he added. The Pageland, South Carolina native, weighs 217 pounds now, just 7 pounds over his playing weight. He gave up basketball as an off-season conditioner and stuck to hunting during the winter. Mungo is getting down to serious training well ahead of the remainder of the Dodger squad by lobbing them across the students at Joe Stripp's baseball school. The fact that Mungo has accepted his contract as tendered, in contrast with his explosive salary arguments in previous years, is interpreted in the baseball colony here as an indication of his strong desire to get back in winning form. And that is sports, and that is news. Henry Chop reporting for Monday, January 20th, 1941. Have a swell day.